So the next speaker up is Ryan Zurrer. He's a council member at the Web3 Foundation, and he'll be talking to us about the state of Web3 and Polkadot. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the state of Web3 and my favorite project in the space right now, Polkadot. So what is Web3? Web3 is Gavin Wood's vision for a decentralized serverless internet where users can control their own privacy, their own sovereign identity, and effectively their own destiny. Where decentralized peer-to-peer networks leverage trustless incentivization through crypto economic design. Essentially, people can also control their own units of account. And why do we call it Web3? We call it Web3 because we consider this the third evolution of the internet, the re-decentralization of the internet and returning it to its decentralized roots. We went through Web 1, which was static web, read-only websites, no monetization, really poor UI, UX. Then evolved onto Web 2, where websites became more dynamic. A lot of user-generated content started popping up. Monetization started creeping in mostly through data sales and advertising. Social and mobile proliferated. But what we've seen is massive issues around privacy and a huge consolidation of wealth and power on the internet. And so today we're at the dawn of a new era and the knee of the curve of a new generation of innovation in the internet, where decentralized applications that are built natively on WASM virtual machines enable new monetization where users control their own privacy, control their own data, control their own destiny, and most importantly, you have a much greater distribution of wealth and power on the internet. Even today, cryptocurrencies, at every single one across the board, well, not of the major cryptocurrencies, we see a higher Gini coefficient than we do in society at large. So we're already starting to see the first steps of a better distribution of wealth and power on the internet. And why does this matter? It matters because Web 2 has failed us. A small cartel of companies control a massive amount of cloud compute and cloud storage. The FANGs control all of your data. They commercialize it as they see fit, and they don't include you. You are the product of Web 2. I often say to people, we shouldn't get the use of Twitter or Facebook for free. We should be paid to use Facebook. And in fact, if we were properly participating in the value that we create for these social networks, you would see sort of the first iteration of universal basic income. And Web 2 monetization sucks. I mean, we're approaching 2019, and the monetization strategy of the internet remains banner ads and selling your data. I find this ridiculous. I can't believe that if somebody would have asked me in 1997, would we still be looking at banner ads in 2019, I would have thought that'd be crazy. And we deserve better. So this is the genesis of the Web3 Foundation, started by Gavin Wood and his team at Parity. And there are a couple of tenets that I'd like to introduce you to with respect to Web3 as a community. And the first is that we can create a borderless public goods commons with representative governance. Governance in and of itself is a noble pursuit. I know there's a lot of debate around governance in blockchain today, but I think history will reflect that all of the debate was for nothing. And governance enabled faster development, more sustainable communities, more participatory communities, and better overall decision making. We need safe spaces for experimentation. We need upgradable protocols that allow us to push the vanguard of technology without risking billions of dollars. And we need crypto economic design that achieves Nash equilibrium between the different utility actors on a network. And this is quite complicated. So enter Polkadot. Polkadot is interoperability infrastructure for Web3. So it connects disparate blockchains with one another. It's an incredibly ambitious project that offers parallelized security, arbitrary smart contract calls and messaging cross-chain. It has a novel consensus mechanism, a hybrid consensus mechanism that allows for fast finality and security through appropriate crypto economic design. And then for me, what is most interesting about Polkadot, among many things, is the governance mechanism that will guide and accelerate innovation. My prediction is that Polkadot will evolve much faster than anything else we see today, in part because, or actually primarily because of the way that its governance is made up. And then the last thing, and this should not be understated, it's led by what is, in my opinion, the top team in the space. I've spent the last 5 years evaluating different teams and deploying capital based on those evaluations. I feel like I've seen most of the kind of high-profile teams around the world, and where most teams have 4 or 5 really talented blockchain engineers, the Parity team is about 50 deep of truly vanguard thinkers, the leaders of the space, pushing this industry forward, and quite fearlessly so. So a quick overview of what Polkadot looks like. So the base chain, which we call the relay chain, is the native consensus mechanism that links parachains. Parachains are constituent blockchains that are built natively in Substrate and deployed on Polkadot. They interact very quickly with Polkadot, have super fast finality, and translate down to a WASM virtual machine very quickly. For those chains that have legacy issues, say like Zcash or Ethereum, we have bridges that will bridge that legacy chain to Polkadot and allow for that cross-chain messaging, which is so unique. There are a number of interoperability projects in the world. However, this is the only one that I know of that will allow for arbitrary cross-chain messaging and not just a cross-chain token transfer. Cross-chain transfer of value is one use case. But when you allow for arbitrary smart contract calls cross-chain, you open up a whole world of new use cases. And this is what essentially makes Polkadot so special. It's designed to be composable, so you can sort of break down different chains and have them communicate with one another, and then within those chains, they can also be a relay chain and offer these relay services to other chains. You can transfer security from one chain to another and sort of offload your security, and effectively, we decouple security from consensus. And with Polkadot, you can actually change your consensus mechanism in real time. I was just joking with Stefan a little while ago that you could literally program to have a parachain that is a BFT threshold relay on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and a POS on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that's doable on Polkadot. I know of no other project where that's even conceivable. A huge advantage here is the parallelized security. This is a massive new step forward in scalability, where you can essentially offload your security to a different chain, and the base relay chain is able to secure more than one chain without sacrificing security on one chain or the other. This parallelized security is a very important feature. Another thing that's super impressive about this team is, to my knowledge, no major project has shipped a major milestone in the history of our industry on time. And Polkadot will ship in Q3, mainnet, Q3 of next year. We're about a week away from POC 3, and that will have a governance mechanism. And then mainnet Q3 of next year, call it late summer, early fall. And that will actually put it about 6 months ahead of schedule. So this will be the first project in the history of our industry to ship ahead of schedule. But then on to what I think is actually really cool. And for me, the thing that I spend the most amount of my time at the Web3 Foundation thinking about and jamming with different engineers on, and that's the governance model. And so there are a number of really important features in the governance model. I'm not going to get into everything tonight, but I'm happy to walk through it. This is all pretty fresh. These are Gavin's slides from less than a week ago. But effectively, you've got a referendum, so a voting mechanism, adaptive quorum biasing. So I'll get into this a little bit, but effectively, you need a greater amount of yay votes over nay votes, depending on how few people vote. You have a council that sort of helps speed up the process of tabling measures for voting. Lock voting sort of allows people to say a hard yes or a hard no, depending on how much they want to lock up their tokens. There's a treasury, so think of this as like a DAO that will deploy part of the block reward to other constituents other than just validators. So app layer developers and protocol layer developers can all get paid out of the block reward. And then delayed autonomous enactment is just a fancy way of saying after a vote is measured on or is voted through, there's a period of delay of say curing before it actually goes through. And that effectively just allows people to, should they think that this vote is catastrophic for the entire ecosystem, they can then opt out and sell their tokens and move on before that goes through, that hard fork, that is. So how does this work? You've got your coin holders, which are effectively the backstop of this governance mechanism. They can table motions, and then they can all actually sort of vote up or down motions to then be considered next in line. So some people can propose motions, and then other people can sponsor them and get them higher up in the queue. There's a council that may cancel a motion if they unanimously vote for it. The council today will be made up of 12 members, and they'll rotate one per month, and then eventually get voted back in. So after 12 months, your mandate is up, and you'll have to move out, and then try to get yourself voted back in after a 1 month cure period. And these council members can also table motions, either through unanimous vote or through any non-unanimous vote. Then they require a higher majority from the coin holders to pass that vote. And within this mechanism, when token holders vote, they can vote with a locking measure, and that gives their votes more power. So if you have less tokens, but you really believe in a certain measure, you can vote and lock your tokens up longer and effectively get more weight behind your vote than somebody who has more tokens. So in this example, we've got Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Alice and Charlie vote no. They only have, Alice has 1 dot and Charlie has 4 dots. And they intend to lock it up 8 weeks and 2 weeks respectively. Bob, however, has 3 dots, and he intends to lock his up 6 weeks. So in the end, you've got 9 votes in favor and 8 votes for yes. Bob's tokens are then locked for 6 weeks. Charlie's and Alice's tokens are not locked, so if they think this measure is catastrophic, they can sell out and move on, and the measure goes through. And we see another example where the no vote wins out, but then Alice's 1 dot ends up getting locked for 8 weeks at a time, Charlie gets his lock for 2 weeks in this case in order for that to go through. And then Bob does not have his tokens locked. He can sell out at any given time, depending on what he feels like with respect to that measure. So this is sort of around the argument of, but then the Plutarchs will control your network. And by the way, to be totally honest, it's probably better for the Plutarchs to be in control than either A, a single dictator, or B, the entire majority. I frankly don't want the entire populace of a blockchain, most of whom are speculative token holders, to be voting on highly technical measures that require a certain deep technical understanding of the issue at hand. I would prefer that be left to a very competent technical council and certain people who have an implicit interest in that measure and a threshold understanding of what is at stake and what needs to be done. And this is just a philosophical point that, again, I think in the long run will be seen as obvious in our space, but today, for some reason, it is not. A really interesting innovation that Gavin cooked up that I really like is this adaptive quorum biasing. So basically, the fewer you have in terms of turnout, the more you need of yes above no or no above yes in order to pass that measure. So if we only have 5% of token holders voting, you need actually 82% of that 5% to vote yes for the measure to pass. Whereas if you get to 50% of token holders voting, you only need 59%. And this adaptive quorum biasing effectively solves the turnout problem, which, by the way, has been the major issue of governance today. For those of us who remember the DAO blew up because we couldn't get quorum, right? Everybody knew reasonably that we needed to pass the moratorium. And we missed the moratorium because, again, most people were speculative passive token holders and not very active. And by the way, we didn't really have very good governance tools at that time. So the moratorium didn't pass, and a week later, the DAO blew up. If we had something like this that allowed a minority to aggressively vote in favor of something, we actually probably would have passed the moratorium, and maybe the DAO would be around today, and the thousands of crypto funds and other speculators would probably not be, and they would have funneled into the DAO. But here we are. So, cool things being built on Polkadot. If you're building applications or layer 2 and beyond, or even if you're building a layer 1, this is probably the easiest framework to build in today. And I'll kind of walk through why that is. Principally because of Substrate. So Substrate is the building framework native to Polkadot. So this is built by Parity. And effectively, it allows for, so it's Rust-based in its primary implementation. It's JavaScript in a secondary implementation, but we're also open to any other implementations if people want to reach out and build something that's awesome. It compiles down to WebAssembly. And Gavin, along with, actually, it was really Martin Beasy who was, I think, the first in the space to recognize that the whole world was moving to a WebAssembly virtual machine. And now even Ethereum has announced, as recently as DevCon 4, that they'll be migrating to a WebAssembly virtual machine. It's on the order of 15x faster than, say, the EVM. So it's highly adaptable. You've got built-in light clients. You can create governance very quickly. If you deploy a parachain in Substrate, its performance and connectivity with Polkadot is far superior than through a bridge. And so it's a great framework. We like to think of it as sort of the software. So if Polkadot's the protocol, the kind of connective tissue, the software to build on it is Substrate. And there will be some Substrate chains and certain Polkadot chains that are not built on Substrate, but those that are built in Substrate and deployed on Polkadot will effectively be the highest performance on the planet. So again, what do you get? Pluggable consensus, so you can switch your consensus mechanism in. You can, if you're building a layer 1 or layer 2, you can focus on exactly what your innovation is, whether it's a privacy measure or whether it's some unique consensus mechanism, and you can leave the virtual machine and sort of blockchain in a box to Substrate. You don't need to recreate the wheel on that. Light client implementation, that's very easy. Like I said, JavaScript implementation on its way, and interconnectable with Polkadot. Another project that I'm really excited about from a governance perspective is Edgeware. So Edgeware is a testnet with real financial incentives. And the point of this testnet is for us to test different governance mechanisms. So I would like to test quadratic voting, and I'd like to test different governance mechanisms with Harburger taxes, and I would like to test some of the governance mechanisms mentioned herein with Polkadot before we roll it out on Polkadot. And a DAO will control about 50% of the block reward and dole out essentially part of this block reward, again, to users, to people for voting, to app developers, to protocol layer developers for pushing things forward. We're also going to use a novel token distribution method, which I've called the lock and drop. So what you'll do is you'll lock up ETH for a period of 3, 6, or 12 months. You'll get your ETH back, so there's effectively no risk, but you get edge tokens depending on how much ETH you've locked and how long you lock it for, and then you can use those edge tokens to participate in governance. So it's a really low risk way of participating in this network. If you're going to hodl, say, 100 ETH or 1,000 ETH over the next 6 or 12 months anyways, you can capture some value on that and play around with this governance mechanism with effectively no risk to your ETH. And again, it leverages the best in-class technology. So built natively on Substrate, deployed on Polkadot. This will be the first parachain deployed on Polkadot. But there's lots of other collaborations in the space. So Zcash is building a bridge. Ethereum's already well on its way to a bridge. Blink, which is a really innovative DAG, will deploy natively as a parachain built in Substrate. Agoric is Mark Miller's JavaScript smart contracts scripting platform. The Web3 Foundation will build their tech stack all on Polkadot using Substrate. So there's a huge groundswell of really talented engineers and projects migrating to this ecosystem. And for me, it kind of feels the same that Ethereum did in sort of 2014, early 2015, where we just wanted to try new things and build something different. And we were sort of tired at that time of the rhetoric and fighting of Bitcoin land. And I confess, I'm kind of feeling the same way today about Ethereum and the rest of the space. That there's a lot of talk, and I would just like to get back to testing and experimentation and really pushing things forward. And so other people who have this view as well are kind of migrating this way. And it's a really cool vibe and a great community and a growing community across the world. I was in Asia just this past week, Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing, and every single one was just packed houses with people wanting to learn more about how they can build their project on Substrate and deploy it on Polkadot. And so we're pretty excited about what's moving forward. The Web3 Summit, it was a very interesting one. For me, it was the best summit of the year, best conference of the year. And Gavin did a demo where he took a Apple computer out of shrink wrap, a computer that he bought that morning, and booted it up, installed some software, and basically spun up a chain, and then on top of that deployed a smart contract for a coin flip gambling game in about 20 minutes. This is something that took years of teams of developers to get to, and now you can deploy from zero to functioning chain with applications being deployed on it in kind of 20 minutes. A pretty significant step forward for our industry. And I think, again, this new architectural approach to solving things like scalability and ensuring decentralization and ensuring that we move forward. So if you want to reach out or get involved or ask for help or resources, please, feel free to contact me or contact the foundation. We have a grants program. There are a number of Polkadot ecosystem funds around the world that are backed by leading venture capitalists. And more importantly, we've got a really strong community of developers who can help you take your app from 0 to 1. So thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Ryan? Yeah.
So right now with Ethereum, there's a serious issue in terms of the amount of data flowing through the chain. I'm just wondering, with Polkadot, since you're looking at interconnecting multiple chains, I'm assuming that issue would be multiplied exponentially eventually. How do you guys deal with that? Just the sheer amount of data.
So there's a couple ways of dealing with it. One is the fact that the virtual machine is considerably faster. Another is that the cross-chain messaging platform allows for messages exchanged between chains without necessarily writing to the chain or writing to the relay chain. So two chains can connect with one another and establish some sort of consensus and then write that to the chain, but then exchange data between them without writing every single bit of data to the chain. Yeah. Any other questions? There's a few others. Okay, great.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little more about, you said there's 12 people in that governance model you had. Can you give some more examples of what they'd be doing, and isn't that a little centralized? Like, how do we get away from that?
So actually, I should have mentioned this before, but the current governance model is a work in progress. In fact, when I spoke with Gavin 2 months ago, versus today or versus this past week, there's lots that had evolved. So things will evolve, but effectively the council will review proposals that are posted for voting and basically whitelist it, somewhat similarly to what we had with the DAO. Now that council changes out members every month. A member changes out, and I don't think we've arrived at the necessarily the right number. It may be 12, it may be 24, it may be more, it may be less. But again, we can leave that up to the governance mechanism, right? We can just post to expand the council or reduce the council. The idea is that that council is also voted on by the token holders and then cycled out quite regularly. So it's not like, for example, I'm going to sit on that council forever or something like that. I may ground up votes for it, but then at the same time, I'll be judged based on my performance and probably removed at some point in favor of somebody else. So naturally, I will be removed at some point for somebody else, just for example. But the idea is that the council members have a threshold technical understanding of the different measures that will pass. We will. I don't know whether we see say, one measure voted on per day, or one measure voted on per week, or one measure voted on per month. So I don't know how much work actually goes into being a council member. We don't know this yet. And the nice thing is we can leave all this up to the governance mechanism to figure out as we move along. So if there's one thing that I'm sure of, it's that the governance mechanism will evolve quite dramatically from what it is today. Although in sort of whitelisting, if all 12 members vote against a measure, then they can remove it. And that's just more of a spam protection than it is, say, a means of centralization. And maybe over time, they actually remove the council because it's not needed, because you get such a consolidation of talented, token holders who understand the issues at hand that we don't need a council. And that would be great. However, in, say, the first year or maybe the first 2 years, to ensure that proposals are kind of going along appropriately, that the network isn't getting spammed with crappy proposals, something like this council is actually a good sort of safeguard. But eventually we'll probably take the training wheels off and get rid of the council. But that's just my prediction. We don't know how it goes.
I know you said Gavin Wood was able to spin up everything in 20 minutes, but I'm wondering for an average developer, what's the development tools like? Chrome extensions, endpoints, IDEs, that type of thing.
So you actually touched on a very good point. Gavin Wood's 20 minutes is probably a couple days for somebody else. And you touched on another good point, which is, in my opinion, quite frankly, I think really the next stage in evolution for this protocol is to spin up more sandboxes and tools and development environments that are relatively user-friendly and UI, UX, and things like that. And so that's actually a great opportunity. In the one slide, I showed one project called Polkascan Polkasource, which is like a Etherscan and Truffle for Polkadot. But I myself am very interested in backing teams that are looking to build dev tools. I backed one team called Commonwealth that's building a governance developer tool and governance UI, which will be deployed on Edgeware. But this is something that I've identified as a bit of a gap right now in Polkadot, and where we see gaps, we see opportunities, right? So great point.
Hi, Ryan. The governance, you talk about the framework, very interesting. Is the framework you guys working on specific to Polkadot, or can it be applied to other decentralized, mechanism or framework? For example, MakerDAO. Can you apply that governance mechanism to MakerDAO?
So this is a great point. And I've been with the MakerDAO team since day one. And so I know that their intended governance mechanism is not like this one. And I would also say that this governance is one that prioritizes, say, elegance and execution over simplicity, whereas MakerDAO's governance mechanism will be far more simplistic, at least as a first iteration. Because that's a great thing about governance. Once we give up governance to the token holders, they'll take it where they want to go, right? And so what we may see is that this is running so well and has so many interesting security backstops and is really so efficient that other governance mechanisms like MakerDAO or Tezos or a range of other projects in the space that intend to implement governance like ZeroX may migrate to this type of mechanism. However, I would guess that most of those projects will take a wait and see approach However, they can implement it. And for example, Edgeware will start out with a slightly different governance mechanism than Polkadot. But at some point along the road, we'll probably test Polkadot's full governance mechanism. And I'm very interested to see how that goes. I think it's going to be very, very fun and interesting to watch it unfold.
Just going back to tools. So you mentioned there's already something being built for Polkadot. The company we work for, Northern Block, we're actually building alternatives to Truffle and Remix. So our own version of an ID and CLI. So I'm wondering what gaps currently exist with Polkadot, because I have an assumption that since you can integrate with several different blockchains, there will need to be a different way to deploy a contract to different blockchains to send some transactions. So I'm wondering what kind of gaps exist in the current Polkadot tool set.
So there is an IDE, and there are a range of development frameworks, and you can check them out on the Substrate GitHub. And you know, I would probably start there, and once you're there and playing around with the IDEs that are made, you'll probably identify where your tool and your UI and essentially your tech stack, you know, stacks up with what has been built, and then, you know, from there you'll want to differentiate and probably offer that. And to the extent that you offer some level of extensibility such that someone can easily deploy a contract, you know, via the Substrate framework on Polkadot, but then also say flip over and deploy something, say, in Ethereum, I think that's probably pretty interesting, and will be very interesting as we see different consensus mechanisms pop up, because you'll need obviously somewhat different IDEs depending on the nature of the consensus mechanism and also the nature of the implementation, right? So whether you're writing a smart contract in, say, Mark Miller's JavaScript implementation, or you're writing it in Rust, you'll need a different tool set. And so one thing I would say about Polkadot is we need, you know, a large range of tools and innovations around, you know, IDEs and developer frameworks. So thanks, guys.